Hi, everyone. Oh my God, more than 100 participants just from the very beginning. I'm Anna, I'm your host in your People First Club webinar, and I must say thank you to our partners, No Fluff Jobs, and especially to Olena, who helped to organize everything for today. I know less about European directive, so I'm very thankful to Tomasz and Paulina to be here today for us and preparing this kind of information for us. We'll work 1 hour, and of course, you'll have the presentation and the recording as well on the next day after the webinar, and also have some additional information from our speakers. So when you have time and when you have questions, please write them down in the chat here, and I'll be here to help our speakers to answer them. So let's start and let's focus and get together how we will work during the nearest couple of years. How should we recruit people? How should we work with our text for our job portals, etc.? So let's dive in. Let's work together. And again, thank you so much, Paulina and Tomasz, for making it possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna, for the very warm welcome, and welcome to all of you who just joined. It's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Paulina Król, and I lead the people and operations team at No Fluff Jobs. And together with me, I have Tomasz Villa, who is our Chief Growth Officer at No Fluff Jobs.
Hello, everyone.
And you didn't see Tomasz's photo earlier because we didn't have it for the promotion, but he is here. I'm very glad that that he joins. And just a short sentence about who we are. We are not lawyers, but because our company is an IT job board that focuses on promoting transparency, that's why we are really interested in the topic of transparency, and we are also spreading the information regarding any actions that are taken to build transparency in the employer and employee relationship. So that's why we analyzed this directive of the European Union, and that's why we have the information kind of from the practitioner's side for you today. During today's meeting, we'll attempt to bite into the content of that new European Union directive that relates specifically to the equality of pay between male and female workers, because this has been the biggest topic to eliminate the pay gap. And the directive in general touches upon quite a few different HR topics. However, the primary motivation is to eliminate the existing pay gap between men and women. And according to the latest information, latest statistics from Eurostat, the EU pay gap in 2020 was at 13%. And of course, the goal is to lower it. As you may be aware, the legal system in the EU works in such a way that each country has to agree to the content of the directive before it was published. So there were very wide consultations happening over the last years. And afterwards, it had to be published in the official journal of the European Union. And this has happened already. And from that moment, there are 20 days of like a transition period before it actually comes into force. And I checked this morning because officially the date of coming into force should have been yesterday, so the 30th of May. However, I checked this morning and it is still pending. So it's a question whether it actually came into force yesterday or whether it will be enforced only in the next few days. But in general, there should be no delay. So from yesterday, assuming that it happened as of yesterday, all EU member states have 3 years to create their own internal legislative acts to implement the points of the directive. So already the clock started ticking. And you may ask, so why are we even talking about this topic so early, at such an early stage? And that would be a fair question if you ask that. But as I hope you will see today from what we will be presenting, there are quite a few topics that shall require major changes and quite a systemic approach to get to the point that is required in the EU directive. So that such changes often require more time. And as Anna mentioned earlier, we warmly welcome any questions. If anything is unclear, if you have any questions or doubts, feel free to post them into the chat. And towards the end of our webinar, we'll have some time to answer those questions. Okay, so let's delve into the topic, and let's start with providing some global context. Perhaps some of you are following what's going on in various areas of the world regarding pay transparency. For example, in the US, over the last 2 years, a few states introduced the requirement to disclose transparently pay ranges in job ads. And for example, these states include Colorado, California, also New York City. So some of the kind of bigger and more major players are already believing that this transparency is necessary. Also, maybe some of you have heard of our campaign last year called Respect Yourself. It was primarily focusing on in Poland. And as a part of this campaign, we were gathering signatures for obligatory salary ranges in job ads, and we've sent all of those 13,000 signatures to the European Union, to the President of the European Commission. So this has also played a role in us pushing for more transparent job ads. The directive, as I mentioned, has already been voted upon. It has already been published in the official journal of the EU, and most likely it has been enforced as of yesterday. So the 3-year period to implement it has already started. And I think what's also important for you to realize, because I understand that you may be coming from various perspectives. So maybe some of you represent companies that are in Ukraine, and perhaps you are willing to invite the standards of the EU to your companies to be more transparent companies. Maybe some of you represent companies that have branches or sister companies in any of the EU member states. So there may be different needs or different perspectives that are the main motivations why you are here. But what's important is to understand that when there is a directive at the EU level, each member state will implement it only for their own country. And that's why those implementations can slightly differ from each other. So for example, the Polish act that will be implementing this directive can be slightly different from, for example, from the Slovak way of implementing it, or the Dutch way, or German, and so on. However, all of them have to fulfill all the obligations stated in the directive. What's interesting, even in the text of the directive, it's written that it states the minimum requirements, which can be adjusted as long as the new local obligations are more favorable to the employees. So from that sentence, we understand that in general, the directive is supposed to be pro-employees. It is supposed to help employees have better standards when it comes to pay and pay equality. And when it comes to the timing, it's not quite clear when any of the member states will actually start working on those local acts. For example, in Poland, we are approaching elections in the next several months. So we are aware that there's likely no major moves that will happen. However, in other countries that might differ. So of course, our goal as No Fluff Jobs will be to observe what's going on and to be your first source of information. Okay, so we've provided the background and the kind of general information. So I think what's really of interest here is to get into the details. And so now I'll pass it on to Tomasz to talk about the main changes.
Great, thanks Paulina, thanks for the introduction and for the background. So let's get into the details. So directive has roughly 70 pages. And Paulina and myself analyzed it for you. And we want to share a few crucial changes that we believe will impact, as Paulina said, may already impact your companies if you're incorporated in EU, or hopefully, if once Ukraine joins EU, you will also start. Hopefully soon, you will start also need to be abiding by these rules. And as Paulina said, some of these changes are so far-reaching that it may actually take several months or even years to get ready for them. So change number one, so the same pay for the same type of work or work of equal value, okay? So again, the primary objective of this directive, you need to remember the context, is to eliminate this discrimination of men and women if they perform the same work or work of similar value, okay? And here would like to, you need to realize that we are talking about the value of work rather than value of a particular position. So it's fairly broad context. That being said, we really expect that in practice, these terms will really get close to each other. So in HR world, you may know that we use the concept of valuing positions. So and when we build salary grids in our firms, and we believe that this kind of approach, building salary grids and valuing positions, will be a reasonable approach to achieve the goals of this directive. And what it means in practice, that each position that you have in your company will need to have a particular value assigned to it, okay? And then there should be a given pay associated with that position, okay? So for example, a position requiring a bachelor's degree, no foreign languages, no leadership responsibilities may have a value of, let's say, 2, okay? Associated with that position. At the same time, a management position with, let's say, MBA requirements may have a value of 7. So you build this kind of a scale grid. However, the directive is not very doesn't go into the very big details. So there is some flexibility that each company may be able to create your own scale. It doesn't have to be from 1 to 10 or A, B, C, D. It's your choice, right? I think it will heavily depend on the structure of the company and the size of the companies. Like the bigger companies probably will have more scales. Smaller companies will have more lean approach when applying these valuations to different positions. Okay, but then what you need to know is the directive gives some hints and gives 4 criteria actually when that we will need to use to determine the scales. Okay, and criteria number 1 is the level of skills of a person. So for example, is it a position for a mid developer or senior developer, or maybe intern or experienced person, right? So levels of skills is criteria number 1. Criteria number 2, effort. Effort can be understood in different ways. I think definitely it may be the effort that is required to acquire the competencies to a particular position, to work for a particular position. So for example, number of years of education, the amount of trainings that people need to do to be able to work for the position. Also, effort may mean that we may describe it as a kind of a productivity or intensity of work that's required for that position, achieved per day or per month, and you can measure it based on KPIs, right? So effort is the criteria number 2. Criteria number 3, responsibility of a given job. I think that means is you may differentiate different roles or positions depending on the potential consequences of a mistake, right? I think it's a good example how we can define the responsibility criteria, right? And the 4th one is work conditions. So of course, working in dangerous circumstances in a factory has a different, probably kind of a value versus and risks associated versus typical safe office work. And also interestingly, the directive suggests that when determining all these criteria, when creating this valuation of positions or work, we also need to include the soft skills that are required in that particular job. So not just these four criteria I mentioned earlier, but also soft skills as well. Now, at the same time, what's very important for you to understand, the directive says that not everyone has to earn exactly the same on a position, Okay, so the text allows to differentiate pay even on the same position, as long as it's based on some objective, gender neutral, and non-biased criteria. For example, the accomplishments of a certain person or competencies, right, of an employee, right? So now you're probably asking yourself, like, how on earth we combine the concept of the same pay for the same value of work, right? I've talked about earlier, right? We're doing all this valuation of work positions and everyone should be paid the same, with the fact that actually in the other clause, the directive says not everyone has to earn the same on the same position. So in our opinion, in practice, how it can be solved is when we create these salary grids, we can assign a particular salary range to a position rather than a single value. So for example, for a position of senior Java developer, let's say we have a range of, I don't know, $3,000 to $6,000, okay, a month. And a senior Java developer with fluent C1 English that actually uses this language to communicate with a project manager, let's say from the US, may earn more than another senior Java developer on the same position. So the position which has exactly the same value, but let's say whose English is not as advanced and is not using it in a daily work, right? So again, I think that's our in practical approach to this kind of a challenge, right? And I think also it makes sense, right? So the directive creates this, idea of same pay for the same type of work, same value of work, but gives some room for, again, objective, non-biased criteria that we can still differentiate pay for certain people, right? And again, these are the objectives are like what kind of competencies people have and what kind of accomplishments people have, even on the same position. So that's the change number one.
Great, thank you very much. And now, actually, after each of those changes, we'll have like a short summary to make sure that we understand what are the main takeaways and the very actionable steps that should be done. Of course, each of our companies is at a different level of development, and some of those points probably or maybe already done, while in other companies, you may be only just at the very beginning, or you may be just trying to learn what should be the order of doing things. So it's kind of like a checklist. And we could, of course, discuss each of those points at length, and each of them could be a separate webinar, but that's not the point now. Right now, we just want to build the framework, just the main understanding. And so from the first change, the main takeaways are for the first thing that we should start if we want to build the salary grid would be to define and unify the names of the positions at our firms. So, do we have, let's say, junior, mid-year, senior experts? What are the right people having the right positions at this point? Are the positions in marketing team or sales team or IT team, are they somehow connected or not? Is there some unification? If not, this is something that you can start with just to have order in what's going on. The second point is then assigning the value that a particular position has for the company based on the criteria that the EU states. So the 4 criteria that have been listed specifically. Then the next step is for each of those positions that have the value will be to assign and allocate the salary range. And then once that is done, the easiest and kind of the most natural step is to create an internal salary grid. So a salary grid is a document that basically takes all the above information into one file, has it clearly stated, okay, what is the salary range for each position, and you may want to disclose that to people who are in your teams or in your company to show that you're a transparent company and have things in order. So these are the things that are kind of the direct takeaways from the first change. And now we can move on to change number 2.
Great, thanks. So change number 2, pay transparency before hiring an employee. right? So it's a recruitment kind of an area, how this directive impacts the recruitment. So there is this clause in the directive which says that in the introduction, to give the context, the lack of information on the pay range creates this asymmetry of information, and this asymmetry of information then limits the bargaining power of candidates, right? So that's the context. This is what directive says, that this is a challenge, and they want to solve this problem. And then the directive gives some clear requirements, right? So it requires to show then either a pay range or initial pay. Now, initial pay most likely means that the starting amount that someone will be earning at the beginning, most likely. However, I think it may also refer to the minimum, or let's say lowest amount that someone could earn on that particular position. Like the example is in Slovakia, actually. Slovakia already has a law which requires providing minimum amounts that someone could be earning on a particular position, right? So, but again, the directive gives the flexibility of either providing the range or like initial pay, so most likely the exact amount. And then the key question is when this information needs to be provided. So here the directive is fairly broad and gives a few different options. So option number one is in the job offer, in the job ad. The second alternative is before the interview. Now, it does not say before the first interview, before the second or final, it's not clear. Or the point number, like in another amount that allows for the negotiation. Again, the context is both sides need to have like this symmetry of information, right? And be able to negotiate it well, right? It should be a two-way street. So the text is very broad in this clause, as you can see. As Paulina said, each country will implement this into the local code. So we don't know, let's say, how Poland or Slovakia or Germany will implement it. But from our perspective, as you may know, at Fluff Jobs, over the last eight or actually even 9 years now, we believe that the transparent recruitment process begins always with sharing salary ranges in the job ad, right? And also additionally, because a range could be between 1,000 and 10,000, which doesn't give much information, right? So we believe that it shouldn't be too broad, the range, and we are promoting the rule of X to X, which means that the higher band of a range shouldn't be more than double the lower level, right? And such approach, so in our opinion, relatively limited ranges won't just eliminate the pay gap, that again is the goal of the directive, but also will save everyone's simply time, right? Because if we provide information at the later stage, at the final stage of the interview, there's a high chance that someone would just simply say no because they have no idea, and the proposed salary could be lower than what they are currently making, right? So that's our approach and our recommendation. Again, the directive is broader, so we'll see how it will be implemented, but definitely the directive says it cannot be less conservative. So it could be actually improved or like make it more strict on the local fronts. And additionally, I think it's again our kind of educated guess that the candidates at different stages of the interview process may ask a recruiter what will be the salary range for the position, because that's the spirit of that directive, and the recruiters likely will have to provide that answer. So again, from our perspective, the most reasonable is to provide salary ranges in the job offer from the very beginning. Additionally, and it's also very important to know that the employers or the recruiters will no longer be allowed to ask a candidate, what's your pay history? So recruiters, you will not be able to ask, hey, what's your current pay? How much you're currently making in your current company, or how much you were earning in your previous companies as well. Like it will be not allowed. It's fairly strict here. And the purpose of this point is to not allow a situation where a particular person is kind of glued to a low wage, even when switching companies, right? So that's also important change included in the directive.
Great. So when it comes to the second change, what are the action points? As Tomek said, the first thing is to have and to share the information regarding the expected pay to the person or the team that's responsible for recruitment, and ideally for them to be able to publish it. But if the policy is different, at least for the recruiters to know what are the ranges. And then the second point is educating all the people involved in the recruitment process. So not only the owners of the processes, not only recruiters themselves, but very often there are more people, of course, involved in recruitment processes. So all the people should be educated that they shouldn't or cannot even ask about the level of prior salary at any point during the process, as that will be forbidden.
Paulina, before you move further, just a small follow-up question here from Anna in chat. When we talk about to-do list, does it mean that these are things to be checked by external audits, by authorities, or it's more just recommendations from you as a speakers?
Yes, these are recommendations. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. These are our recommendations of steps that will help you fulfill the requirements of the directive. So these are very kind of practical actions that can be taken to make sure that everything is in order.
And again, just say it once again, then each country will produce its own version of that, and maybe something will be different in Germany if you operate in there, or in Poland, or in Czech Republic. Yeah.
Yes, however, the directive states the minimum requirements. So it cannot be less than that. So for example, if the directive says, yes, you will not be able to ask about prior salary during the process, none of the member states can change that. So this is kind of the point of education. It will be necessary. It can be made harder if there will be a change kind of pro-employees, but it cannot be less than what is stated in the directive.
Understood. And what about asking for salary expectations? That if there is any reference in the directive for that?
There's no mention of that.
No mention. Okay.
Yeah.
And coming
okay, let's move forward. Yeah, there are a lot of questions in chat, but we'll continue with question answering later.
And coming back to our to-do list, yes, these are our recommendations, but again, very directly related based on our read of the directive, right? So they are not this is what we believe right now will have to happen to implement the directive, right, in a practical way. Okay, change number 3. So transparency in pay setting. Okay, another important thing that all the companies will need to incorporate. So employers will have to present to all the employees the criteria based on which the companies make decisions about the level of pay, as well as the pay promotions or raises, generally speaking, right? So, and the directive gives a few criteria that should be considered when you create, when it comes to the raises, so pay increases. So number 1, individual achievement, so the quality of a work of a particular person, productivity, I think it could be also results that someone is having dependent on the actual work rather than the outside economic circumstances, right? So that could be individual achievements. Development of skills, if someone already developed some skills, could be also criteria where we can include in our document to explain to employees the potential pay progression, and seniority, right? So there's 3 criteria EU mentions. And we believe that in practice, the directive de facto introduces the requirement of having written development paths for internal uses at the company, right? And in principle, this should apply to all the companies in a given country. However, the directive allows member states to exclude companies who have less than 50 people, 50 employees from that obligation, right? Again, we don't know whether each country will do it or not, but there's this kind of open door for this for carve out for smaller companies. So another big change in our opinion. So transparency in pay settings.
Yeah, so while the previous change was more about the candidates, this is more about the current employees that we have, that they have the clarity and the transparency of how it's possible for them to to progress, basically. So a couple to-do points from this change. So the first one is to have clear and written rules for remunerating employees. And it's important that it's not only the base pay, but also bonuses and also available benefits, who are they available for, and so on. So it has to be a full kind of process or like procedure, a kind of a quite a thorough document specifying all the available possibilities. And then the second point is creating and publishing internally development paths. And I don't know to what extent your companies have that already implemented. Maybe yes. At No Fluff Jobs, we are just now at the final steps of doing that. So I can tell you that it takes time. And that's why it's better to think about it as kind of a major project for a given period, let's say a quarter or two, or sometimes even 3, because of course it depends how robust your structure is. But development or career paths are kind of a natural supplement to salary grids. So, you know, when you have a salary grid and when you have specified what are the salary ranges for each seniority, if I am a mid-year, I am interested in what should I do in order to move on to the senior level of pay and of competence. So exactly, this is the reason why development paths are created. And they answer the question, what do I have to do to make the next step in my career? So it should include both the formal requirements, but also the necessary competencies, typically kind of both the hard and the soft skills that are mandatory at the higher level of seniority. And just a side note that career paths can also be horizontal. So it is, of course, also possible to move sideways to a different team. So that can also be included in those available paths in a given company.
Just a small follow-up here, Paulina. All these rules, how do you think, are applied only to in-house employees, like employee of record, or it's also like contracts and all these other kinds of employment?
That's a very good question. And we will actually get back to it at a later stage, because the directive is not entirely clear. Definitely everybody on employment contract will be under this directive, and this should be referred, and whether they're on fixed term or indefinite period or definite period or part-time, full-time, all of those, whether it's an important, that'll be included. For example, B2B contractors, it's not that clear because the directive actually refers to factual relationships. So not really to the type of contract that you have with your employer or employee, but the actual relationship. But I believe this will really come down to the interpretation of given countries, how that will be implemented in different ways, and maybe even just translation. So yeah, but it's a very good question. And I think for that, we need to wait for the actual legislative acts later on.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so change number 4, the right to information. In my opinion, like very, very like big change that companies need to get ready for this. So basically what it means in practice is every employee will have a right to come to his or her manager and ask about what's the average pay for the same position as mine, split between men and women. Okay, so and the company will have to provide this information about the average pay for the position, right? So what's important, it doesn't say, this rule doesn't say that everyone will know everyone's pay in a company. No, this is not what the directive says. We don't even have to provide as an employers information about the average salaries for all the positions to everyone. It's just we need to provide the information for that particular employee about the averages for his or her position, okay? So, for example, not everyone will need to know what's the average salary of a board of directors, let's say, but if one of the members of the board of directors goes to the big boss and asks, hey, how much on average people make here on women and men, the big boss will have to tell this information, right, to this member of management board. The same as all the, let's say, again, let's pick this senior Java developer may ask HR or his or her manager, hey, what's the average pay of a senior Java developer split between men and women in a company, right? And this right of information to the information will make, in my opinion, a big difference, because if there is an internal, I call it mess, that the company pays very differently, people will quickly realize that, right? And right now, the companies will no longer, be allowed just to not disclose this information.
Exactly. That's why the main task, and it's a big task, as Tomek just mentioned, is to put all the remuneration and all the compensations in order. And we know, in HR that it takes time. It's sometimes if the discrepancies can be large, maybe you don't want to do the adjustment right away, like full speed, but you want to split it in, let's say, 2 review cycles to make the adjustments kind of more gradually, so that whenever you are actually obliged to share the average, it will not come as a shock to anyone. Of course, it is normal and okay if there are some differences, but as the directive says quite often, they're okay as long as they can be proven by objective and gender neutral reasons. So so that's why it's actually a big thing to review the current discrepancies of people who are on the same positions or similar work of similar value or of equal value, and see whether there is any potential for some problems, let's say, and if there is, to talk about it and to address it in the next couple of years. And the second point is to just simply practically to have a mechanism. It may be as simple as an Excel formula to calculate the average remuneration for people performing work of the same value, with the split for men and women. But we know that because there's still some time until the change will be required, I assume that some of the payroll systems will have relevant, adjustments or widgets that will support us in keeping such information handy. But even if we are asked as HR to provide the average, we will have 2 months, a maximum of 2 months to provide it to the particular employee. So it doesn't have to be kind of right away handy at all times or updated at all times, but upon request.
All right, so the last major change that we believe is important arising from the directive is reporting. Okay, so what it means, larger companies, so above 100 employees, will have to report on the information about the pay to the certain monitoring bodies. So every government will need to set up a monitoring body, and all these larger companies will have to publish these reports to this monitoring body on a frequent basis, I think annually at least. And we don't know exactly how the report will look like, but we already know some of the information that the companies will have to report on. So the main one is the reporting about the pay gap. Again, the biggest, so the different, how's the pay gap defined? I think the difference between average pay of a woman versus average pay of men on a particular position divided by the average pay of men. So it could be, 5%, 10%, 20%. But also the directive mentions the medians and quartiles. So we don't want to go into too much details at this stage. If at some point you would like, we could arrange another meeting. As we know, analytics is one of the most favorite topics of HR people. But there will be also some transition periods to get ready for medium companies. But the directive opens the doors to provide this requirement for different countries for smaller companies as well. So we'll see. Poland may say actually all the companies above, let's say 20 people have this requirement. So definitely at least the larger, more than 200 people, but smaller companies, who knows, maybe they will also provide this reporting. And interestingly, companies will have to report annual gross salary, so annual and hourly one. So at least typically in Poland, we provide monthly. Here they mention annual pay, including all the bonuses, including all the benefits, as well as the hourly one. The directive also suggests, but it's not mandatory, that the companies would publish this information, this, let's say, average the pay gap, on their websites or some external reports, to use it as a great PR tool. At the same time, the monitoring body, so I said all the companies would have to provide this information to this monitoring body. It's a governmental institution, but this monitoring body will prepare a website, and on that website, all the details about these reports will be published, split by a company. So everyone in the in Poland say can go to this website and can check what's the pay gap for company X and company Y, and it will be widely available, right? So again, big thing. So we believe this will be a big mobilizing factor to especially to reduce this pay gap. And also, this clauses say that if a pay gap, as I described earlier, the formula exceeds 5%, and the employer cannot objectively explain it, and it cannot resolve it within, I think, 6 months, the company will have to undergo a detailed, like an internal audit or like pay analysis together with employees' representatives. And later on, they need to provide this report to the monitoring body and all the employees. So again, if your pay gap is more than 5%, you need to, and you cannot, again, objectively explain it, because I can imagine that there could be situations where, I know for a particular position, you have 10 people and 7 of them are women, and most of them actually have more competencies. They may actually have higher pay, and that's okay. And the pay gap may be, I know, again, 7%. So you can objectively explain higher than 5% pay gaps. But if you cannot do it objectively, then again, you need to run a report, do the internal audit, and potentially get ready for some fines from the monitoring body, and get ready for a PR issue if suddenly on that website, it's disclosed that your pay gap is 30%, right? I think it could be a major PR issue.
All
so
right.
That was.
Yeah, we need to, I think, speed up a little bit because there are quite some questions and we still have a few slides to go through. So the action steps are, first of all, to await the templates of the reports. So for now, just wait and see. And in the meantime, you can educate your HR teams on compensation analytics, just to feel comfortable with calculating, what is a median, what is a quartile, and, what's an average, what are the differences, and so on. And when it comes to the reporting deadlines, the largest companies with over 150 employees, their first report will need to be submitted by June 2027. So there is still some time to make sure that there's, it's cleaned up. And the smaller companies between 100 and 150 employees, it will be in 8 years. So by 2031. So there is, it's not something that is kind of really looming on us right away. Okay, so these were the main changes that kind of were jumping at us when we reviewed the directive, but we also asked ourselves a few additional questions. So as Anna, you already asked, who is affected by this directive? So firstly, it's important to say that the directive is directed at both the public and the private sector. So it's not either or, but it should refer to all employers. And as we mentioned already, definitely people with employment contracts. And the question is regarding, other civil contracts or B2B and others. So it's not yet certain, and we will await the local acts. The next question, what sort of remuneration, what sort of compensation are we talking about? And here it's important to add that the directive refers to the total compensation. So it's not only the base salary, but also all sorts of bonuses, benefits, anything that may be added that kind of the company gives. It should be a package. So that's good to remember. The next question, will the language of recruitment change? And that's an interesting one because there's a fun fact that the directive places an obligation to ensure that the name of the position as well as the content of each job ad should be gender neutral, right? So for example, I don't know whether in Ukrainian works like that, but in Poland, for example, there is rekruter and rekruterka. So he a recruiter and she a rekruterka. So either you can just stick to English names because they are gender neutral, or if you use any kind of local that are not gender neutral, it should be important to include both to make sure that there is no discrimination there. The next question, will the compensation remain confidential? So as we mentioned, there will be the calculation of the average and the information will be kind of disclosed. As Tomek mentioned, the idea of the directive is not to make all the salaries known to everyone. There are some procedures and processes in place to make sure that, for example, even for the smaller teams or teams that have only men or only women, that it's not kind of about disclosing information. But it's interesting that the directive states that the employment contracts won't be able to include the clause that the information about remuneration is confidential as refers to realizing this directive. So it's hard to know what they actually mean, but I'm just kind of highlighting it now because there may be some required changes to the actual text of our contracts. So this is something just to pay attention to when the local acts are enforced. Yeah, so the next question, what if the company hires only women or only men? And here we have to, compare the pay of women to pay of men. How would that work? And so actually, if there is no way to create the comparison internally within the company, the directive assumes a mechanism of a comparator with similar companies from the industry. Or even if that's impossible, then it even allows to refer to statistics and to generally accepted standards of what a pay should be. So, this is fairly vague. So we'll see again how that will be put into practice when it comes to actually the reporting obligations. And the last question now, what are the penalties if any company ignores this directive? And I think the most dangerous one is that if the report shows that there was an unexplainable pay gap, employees have the right to come to the employer and request full compensation for the amount that was due to them. So the difference that was due to them that they didn't receive, and also that considers the past with no time limit in the past. So this may be the biggest kind of harm, that the company will need to, jump out of money for kind of not being fair in the past and being discriminatory in the past. However, the employee can also notify the authorities about the employer, and then those authorities can request the employer to kind of stop breaking the law and submit to the obligations. And then if that is insufficient, kind of the request, they can also apply some financial fines that can be related to some business indicators. So for example, the turnover or revenue, a percentage of revenue. So these are kind of some possible ways that this can be harmful to the companies. Okay, how we can help as No Fluff Jobs, just briefly, I mentioned already that we are the top European IT job board that operates in Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, and Slovakia. So we are in 6 countries in in Europe. And in general, we want to be your partners in implementing EU rules and regulations, and whenever you need that. And what I think it means in practice is firstly, just the information. So you can follow our social media, because we'll be, Lena actually, who's with us here, who arranged it. She's the lady behind the knowledge for the Ukrainian market and all our marketing. So we want to partner. We also want to educate you, just as we do now. If you have any questions, we want to be at your disposal. as your partners. Also, we want to help you be a transparent company. And if you want to, of course, we welcome you to come to No Fluff Jobs to show your job ads. And every ad includes a salary range. So by positioning yourself on our website, you are also positioning yourself as a transparent company, which can be used as a great PR tool. So far, over 6,000, still 6,000 companies have trusted us and posted job vacancies on our job boards. And so we are very, very happy about that. We are very active in Ukraine. We have a great team, which we are very proud of. And we have this opportunity that for Ukrainian companies, if you want to publish ads for Ukraine, we fully understand and stand and support you in your difficult situation that you're now with the war. Those ads are for free completely. If you want to publish ads for other markets that we are active in, we have special offers. So we welcome you to contact us with in the address helloua@nofluffjobs.com. We have Andriy, Tanya, and Katya, who will be very happy to speak with you and also to consult you on how to go about transparency, how to think about transparency in recruitment processes. And this is one of the ways how you can get ahead of stand out from other companies on your competitive market. We also have a few employer branding opportunities for building a strong brand in Europe, in those countries where we are present. So we definitely want to partner with you on that as well. Okay, and now we came to the time of questions, and Anna, we are all ears.
Thank you. I have a question from Alana here in chat. So as I understood, all those reports will be submitted to some, I don't know, official thing, and then everyone will be able to see the details of the report, or so the report will be public.
Yes,
that's right.
The key information from the report will be public. Again, we don't know exactly how it will look, but we already know that the pay gap, yes, it will be public, and it will be split between the companies, but also
only the
sectors.
Pay gap, not the average salaries, not the average.
So the directive mentions the pay gap, and also it mentions median and quartiles. It doesn't say about the averages.
Yes, because the average is for the internal use. Yes. When employees ask, then they compare it themselves versus the average. But when you publish it outside, it's the pay gap and the median. Yeah.
Okay. Another question. Will the employee be able to submit a complaint to an independent regulator when they find out that they are victim of inequality at some point during the employment journey, or perhaps maybe a recruitment journey as well?
Yes. So initially they should submit that request to their employer and maybe via an employee representative, or if there is a trade union, of course, or such bodies. And then if they don't do anything about that, then they have the right to take them to court or to any other authority that's relevant.
And also, I think because Paulina mentions that the contracts may need to be changed so that it will allow employees in certain circumstances to disclose externally their pay. I think what it will mean in practice is employees will be able to disclose this information to your lawyers, let's say, if they want to, let's say, if they feel like, oh, their pay is much less than everyone is on the same position, right? And so I think that's another reason why they put that clause there.
Thank you. Another question from Tatiana. Would the rule number 4 be applied to situations where there are just a few employees of the same position? For example, like, we have only 2 people in sales team, and if I ask about average, then I will understand what the number is.
Yeah, so actually the directive says that there will be a process to make sure that any disclosure of such information doesn't actually, you cannot tell what every person earns. So there's a process of kind of anonymizing and kind of growing the group so that the comparison is not kind of obvious to anyone. I think it is left to the member states to come up with the exact mechanism of how to do it, because the information in the directive are pretty general. I wasn't able to come up with a plan of what to do with it after I read it. So I'm still waiting for more details. But there should be, yeah. Go ahead.
It also mentions like the role of an employee representative. So the other solution I can imagine could be is if there are, let's say, 2 people on a particular position, let's say the company informs the employee representative about that information, and that the employee representative doesn't give the exact numbers, but says, hey, you're okay. Or like you're on average. Like we'll see in practice, but definitely, as Paulina said, the intention is not to disclose exact amounts. So yeah, but this is a very good question. We'll see how it will work in practice.
Thank you. Another question from Yulia. Do you understand correctly that salary ranges should be by sex? And the company provides men with salary average for men only? Or like I'm showing both men and women in order to see the pay gap, as I understood.
So actually, the salary ranges, ideally, they'll be the same for every person, whatever their gender or their sex, because this will be even the sign that there is no discrepancy. So ideally, there should be no difference. The comparison between male and female is purely for the averages, for calculating the pay gap. So for other reasons, other points that we talked about, for example, for the salary grid or for the career paths and so on, there's no need to differentiate it.
I would even say stronger. You cannot have salary ranges different between men and women. I think it will be very against the directive. So it has to be just one, gender neutral, right?
So let's go back to the candidates and their rights. So do they have a right to ask about average salary on that value of position in the company?
No, this is the right only for employees, for already existing employees.
Yeah, they will only have a right to get information about either the salary range for a position or initial pay.
Okay, are there any obligations to answer the candidates' questions about possible future career paths and pay raises?
Not stemming from the directive. So it will be goodwill from the company to do so, but there is no obligation.
But it's an interesting question, right? Because you have to have this internally, all these rules, like, and criteria, what will be the pay progression. So I can imagine some companies may actually want to disclose it as a good, again, great marketing tool, like, or PR tool for the candidates to encourage them, right?
Yeah, I already know some companies in Poland who have their career paths public on their website for people who want to apply. So this is already happening. So of course you can always do more than the directive requires, but just not less.
Paulina, can you share those links if this information is public? Maybe we can share it within our community.
Yeah, absolutely. Well. Yeah.
Awesome.
For example, it's a company called Envedo in Poland. ENWEDO. Yeah.
Thank you. So let's sum up with the final questions with timing. Just to remind everyone, this is right now all the countries have the 3 years to develop their own laws on the country level. So what we have to follow, or what we have to do now, or we have to wait? What's your advice here?
So when it comes to the general framework, if you realize that you are missing some of those points, I think it's good to start working on them, because whatever the directive says, whenever it comes into force, actually these are good both for your employees and for your candidates. It's not a must, but it's always a good thing to do. But the next big thing will be to wait for the local acts of the countries that are of interest to you. So if you, for example, you have a branch in Germany, then you'll be waiting, okay, when will the Germans actually have it in practice, in the exact details? If in Poland, then you follow the Polish one. So then that will provide you even more details. We'll of course help you also navigate that. Yeah, just from that moment, it will be even more concrete, and there will be the exact deadline when the requirements will actually be kicked in. So for example, now still at least for 3 years, you can ask for the pay history, but in 3 years, you will no longer be able to ask for a pay history.
No matter the country.
Exactly, yeah.
And what I would add to this is like, I wouldn't wait for and just wait and see, because there are some things you definitely will have to do. So I would if I were you, I would first of all internally check, do you have salary grids? Do you have, do you have clear positions set up? Just clean it up, even though you don't have to disclose all these averages, all this information to employees yet, but internally do this internal cleanup, get ready, because you have to do it anyway, right? You have to do it anyway. And as Paulina said, it will take, in certain cases, it will take longer time. And then, all the details, reporting, deadlines will come later. But if you do not do this cleanup earlier, like you probably, have to do it in a rush, which is never good.
And also, I would encourage just to talk to any kind of decision makers, because they will need to be convinced that this is not only required, but this is good for your company, good for your candidates, good for your employees. And so I know that even such conversations can take longer to kind of the convincing time doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, agree. But no matter what, as I remember, 2027, the reporting will be in place.
Yeah, that's for the largest companies. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Larger is over 150.
Yes, exactly. 150 plus.
So no matter what, no matter country, in 2027, the reporting will be in place.
Yes, because this date is already put into the directive. So that's why it's kind of already set.
But other requirements could become earlier. Like I can imagine, I don't know, let's say take Czech Republic, like next year, they can implement the law, and already from that moment, they start providing average salaries to the employees internally, right? It can happen, right? So again, it's up to maximum 3 years, but it may be quicker. So it depends on every government decision.
Again, thank you so much, Paulina. Thank you so much, Tomasz and Olena, for helping to organize these events. Really understand everything point by point, really well structured. Thank you so much. And thank you for your position about Ukraine and for your support.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure and thank you for your time and your interest in this topic. We will share also our details. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And also we'll, in our presentation that you'll receive, you'll get some of the links that may be relevant to you, and also some of the contacts to our team. If you want to follow up, we'll be more than happy to stay in touch.
Yeah, and here is our community. A lot of thank you in chat as well. Thank you so much. You're a very pleasant audience to work with. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
So see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.